Hi guys. Okay, so we're going to continue with our theorists here. Freud is my longest, but this might take another couple to get through all of them. I like to do this thoroughly now so that we don't have to just do it, redo it and do it and do it. And so as we talk about them later, you'll hopefully remember who they are. Okay, so one of my faves here is Erikson. You'll see a little younger than Freud, 1902. But we'll talk about his little relationship with that. He is also under psychoanalytic. So Freud was the father of psychoanalysis, which basically just means that it was the belief that the unconscious, that there are unconscious things that drive personality and behavior, but really that things that happen to us in our past drive personality and behavior as we get older. So Erikson, though, his became more about psychosocial development. So let's talk a little bit about him, though. Erikson's interesting to me because Erikson is not his real name, and I don't actually have it in front of me at the moment. He actually changed his own name. And if you think about what Erikson means, it means son of Erik. And so basically for him, it was son of self. And he did this as part of his own identity crisis as a young man. He was born, his mother, he never knew his biological father. His parents were still married, but his father had left the family. And the mother had a relationship with another man after the father left and was gone. And Erik was the product of that. He didn't know that man though either. The mother ended up marrying his pediatrician and he became his father. One of his parents was Protestant and one was Jewish. And at the time, in the context, in the early 1900s in Europe, this was tough. This was very tough. And he never felt like he fit in anywhere. The Jewish children felt like his adopted stepfather, was Jewish. So he didn't look Jewish, and so he had a hard time with the Jewish children. But then his last name was Jewish, and so he had to. So anyway, he struggled with both worlds and both contexts, and never really figured out who he had trouble fitting in. Then when he graduated from high school, he became a bohemian, and he basically traveled Europe, painting some in France and painting children. He loved to paint children. He loved children. And just kind of traveling around, itinerant, as it were. And then a friend told him that that Anna Freud, who is Freud's daughter, was opening a school with someone else. And so he went off to join that. I think it was in Vienna. Might be wrong there, but it was in Vienna. To learn. And so he learned Freudian theory through Anna Freud. He did meet Sigmund, but he was not really a student of Sigmund's. He was a student of Anna's. He was actually a client of Anna's and a colleague. He met with her like every day for therapy, and it was like $12 a month or something. And he kind of learned this whole idea and learned about himself a great deal. He did feel like he learned about himself. Ultimately, he broke off from the Freudian world because of, as many did, Jung and Adler's, many of Freud's students left because of the sort of complete focus on the sexuality to some degree, and a finding of their own path. So Freud didn't like people leaving his path. And Freud actually, though, burned, this I should have said earlier, but he burned almost all of his papers. Every few years he would burn his work. So we don't have a whole lot of, except what he published. So anyway, he did break off eventually from Freud. But he did work with Anna to begin a school. And when he went out on his own, he ended up doing a lot of, he moved to America because Europe wasn't a good place for the Jewish population at the time. So he ended up moving to America at some point, and he ended up working at Harvard. And here's one of the most interesting things I think about Erikson. He never had anything more than a high school degree. These days, you couldn't go knock on the doors of these major universities and get a job. But he did, and but he left there too. He did a lot of observing of children in different contexts and different cultures, and that's in a lot of Native American children, and realized how these cultures helped shape, how their early experiences and cultures helped shape who they became as adults. So that was a big part for him. So he has psychosocial, where Freud's is psychosexual, so keep that in mind. And what he thought was that people face challenges or crises. This is a key word. I even think it's in your quiz. So crises, plural of crisis. So that in every age period, different age period, we would have a crisis within us. And it was like a continuum. And so we would fall on this continuum somewhere. And his theory focused on the impact of family and culture, not sexual urges. But that family and culture could deeply and unconsciously impact who we become. So here's what his stages look like, and we'll see that they do line up with Freud's to some extent. We have birth to one, like Freud, trust versus mistrust. Now remember, Freud's was oral, and how did they get that oral fixation satisfied was through sucking and feeding. So if you look at this, how do children 0 to 1 learn to trust their world? Their world is about sucking and feeding and comfort, the comfort and nourishment that brings. And so it matches to some degree. So we have trust versus mistrust. Now remember, this is a continuum. So it's not that we necessarily just end up either way on trust or way on mistrust, but that we're somewhere along that line, and we hope we end up on trust. And it's, do I trust the world? Is the world going to meet my needs? Is it a safe place to be? So then 1 to 3, where Freud's was anal and kind of that potty training and control issues. And you think about children at this stage are learning that they're their own little people. And if you think about a 2 or 3-year-old, man, they want to try everything, do everything on their own. It is about that, what they can be in control of. So we have our 1 to 3s here, autonomy. That is sort of having a selfhood, realizing a selfhood. Figuring out that you are your own person and you have the strength and capacity to do things for yourself, having autonomy versus shame and doubt. So this had a lot to do with how caretakers would respond to children who tried kind of to have their own autonomy or own selfhood and control over their bodies and what they did or where they went. If they were given that autonomy, let the child run, in safety with boundary, give them some freedoms and let them learn through those freedoms. If they were shamed, oh, look at you, you're always doing this and you can't do it right and da-da-da-da-da or whatever, you're bad. They would shame and they would doubt their capacity to trust themselves. This is sort of about self-trust. And so we look at this as adults, and it might look like somebody afraid to go out on their own or not believe, being ashamed of who they are. And so trying to hide that. So 3 to 6, this is, preschool, going out into the world a little bit more and so forth, taking initiative on the playground, in preschool with toys and with other kids, taking initiative for little skills that they're starting to learn. Again, how does the caretaker respond? If they, guilt and fear, so the child tries to pour their own juice. You spilled it everywhere. And there's some shame in that too, but they may then feel like afraid to try new things. So these two are kind of closely related. It might be autonomy being more of that self-trust to do things, initiative actually taking action in the world. 6 to 11, keep in mind what they're doing. They're in school, right? So we have industry versus inferiority. So this is a huge one for our middle childhood children. We'll talk a lot about this. How do they're learning skills of all different kinds in school. And how are they showing up? Are they, where in the pack are they? Are they good at some things and not good at others? Do they feel inferior, or do they feel superior, or do they feel like they have a balance in these places? Adolescence. This was where Erikson, getting ahead of myself. Erikson struggled the most was with his identity. And so the whole identity crisis comes from him in this identity versus role confusion. And the big question of this period is, who am I? Who am I? I'm not this child anymore, yet I'm not an adult. So who am I? Adulthood, where Freud stopped here, really, and figured adulthood followed, once you kind of got to adolescence and early adulthood, that was it. You'd kind of reached your end, and all the rest was dependent upon what came first. Erikson did see us continuing to grow and change. So there are 3 stages of adulthood. In early adulthood, into our 20s, we have intimacy versus isolation. So am I finding a partner? Think about what we're really trying to do in these periods. Am I finding a partner? Am I finding intimate relationships with friends, with people? Or am I isolated? Middle age, 40s, mid-30s into the 40s, 50s even, into the 50s, generativity. So maybe I've had a family. What am I going to do? I think of this as life purpose. What am I going to leave behind for the generations to come, for my generations to come? How am I going to take care of my children and my grandchildren? And how am I going to contribute and keep growing and being of value? And then older adulthood, how do I look back on my life? Do I see it as an integrated whole, the good, the bad, all of it? And I have some integrity in that I can integrate all the things that have happened into an understanding, or am I in despair and regret? So we see there's a continuum here again. It's not that you are one or the other completely, but that we're somewhere along these lines, and how are we balancing that out? So that is all I have on Erikson, and I'm going to go ahead and stop it so that this doesn't get too long for you.